Let me introduce Craig from Rise Together LA. Thank you, Craig, for coming. The mic is yours.
Thank you for the introduction and the kind words and for opening your amazing home. Hi everybody, I'm Craig Riley from Rise Together. People can make a difference. Everyday people can make a difference. And we're going to walk through where we are in LA, what we all feel on the outside, but what's behind it, how we got here, and most importantly, what we can do about it. And the reality is that before we get into any of that, I want to tell you a little bit about who I am, because you're probably like, who's this random person standing in front of you? And I think it's important that you know a little bit about me. So I am what I like to call a proud, nearly native Angelino. I feel like I've earned that title because I've been here 20 years. I grew up, however, in the rural Midwest. I grew up in a town, so small, the Grove has more people on a Saturday. And I grew up poor. Poor was like 3 levels above where I was. I grew so poor that you couldn't afford shoes. That you had to tape the soles of your shoes to your feet so that you could have something to still walk on. The type of poor where, I'm probably the only person in my social circle who grew up in a household where when you woke up in the middle of the night with hunger pains, you didn't go to the refrigerator because there was no point, because there wasn't any food there. Right? It didn't matter. Like where I lived, when you were poor, you would go out into the field and you would cut food that grew in dishes and roadside dishes and things like that. So it was, let's just say, a less than fun experience. I was orphaned at the age of 14, got a job and a place to live, because in 1996 Indiana, child labor laws aren't a thing, and worked full time, and thankfully, through the grace of a lot of people, a lot of friends, and the kindness of a lot of people, a lot of hard work and a lot of luck, I am not that anymore. And now I came out to LA for college. I grew up in the type of place where it wasn't like, where do you go to college? I said, what is college? Like, why would you go? So I came out, never been to LA before, and now, 20 years later, I have an amazing family. I was adopted by some incredible human beings who are native Angelinos. If any of you have ever had lung surgery, my dad has probably operated on you. His name is Dr. Robert McKenna. He's over at Providence St. John's. And they adopted me, and now I'm Chief Strategy Officer of one of the largest culture marketing firms in America called Rogers & Counts PMK. And we'll get to why I talk about that in a minute. But that this city's suffering is something that is close to my heart. It's something that I know. I don't know everybody's suffering, but I certainly know suffering in our choices, but I also know a sense of optimism in the face of that. So I want to start by reiterating one thing. It is really easy to forget when we think about all the problems that we face and when we walk through them tonight. It is really easy to forget a sense of optimism. It's really easy to let go. It's sort of they win when we lose that sense of optimism. Right? And if you remember nothing else tonight, it's the fact that 75% of Angelinos don't believe that anything that they or anyone else does will ever change anything. That's crushing. 75% of people don't believe that change is even possible in the city, and Rise Together's sole purpose is to change that. So that more than 50% of likely voters in 2022 show up believing in change, and believing change is the only way forward, because with that change, Los Angeles has the opportunity to be the model American city. When we look at America of the 21st century, this city has it all. Right? We can be a representation of a multi-generational, multi-ethnic, multi-economic level background of a city that works for citizens from all walks of life. Like, I love LA. I love LA because of all the things that I see and do from the Watts Towers to the Elysian Park, and I love LA because I see it through my father's eyes. And I see the look in his face when he looks at the crushing state of LA. But we cannot forget that when the eyes of the world in the city are on this city in 2028 for the Olympics, we can be a shining beacon of what it means to be a modern American city that serves its people. But to do that, we're going to need a lot more than 75% of people believing that change isn't even possible. So, how did we get here? Well, in my day job, I work for major corporations and clients, including the late Kobe Bryant, the last 5 years of his life, in looking at where society and culture is headed now, in 3 years, in 5 years, and saying, okay, if we're going to meet the world where it's going, instead of reacting in real time, what do we need to do now? How do we reverse engineer the future for the betterment of everyone? And seeing what felt like a city falling off a cliff in 2019, I sat down and I said, okay, so something is clearly wrong here. And I've long been involved in nonprofits and informally advised federal candidates, but never focused municipally, but this is crazy. So I'm gonna just start taking a deep dive. 40,000 pages of research, materials, and studies later, 3 sets of data kept coming up over and over and over again. And none of this is gonna surprise any of you. The first is that it's not just me and my parents who love LA, it's the people of LA who love this city. People love LA. They want to love LA, and that's awesome. People do not feel the same way about like Tulsa or Tallahassee, right? That's okay, right? But the passion index, what we call it for LA, is off the charts, which is great because I don't have to convince you that this city is worth saving. Pretty sure you all believe it, right? And even the people who are leaving want to believe it. Second is that for the first time in history, Angelenos are nearly unanimous in their priorities. And we haven't gotten rid of neighborhood interests by any stretch of the imagination, but as I am fond of saying, you do not tell a morbidly obese patient with 3 bullet wounds to get on a treadmill. You gotta get the bullets out first. And we are in unanimous agreement on what those bullets are. 91% of Angelenos agree on the crises confronting the city. Homelessness, affordability, and crime. Homelessness, affordability, and crime. And most importantly, the third piece of data is that the vast majority of Angelenos no longer trust that their elected officials even share those unanimous priorities, much less are willing to do anything about it. Like, okay, this is all, I'm guessing this is a surprise to no one, right? This tracks. But it's not enough to know this data. We have a lot of leaky pipes, right? But where is the water coming from? Where's the source? We've all come home and you see water on the kitchen floor. What's the first question you ask? Where is the water coming from? I've been in this environment. So where is the water coming from in LA? Where's the water main? You can patch all the leaky pipes you want. You're still just patching pipes until you turn off the water to fix the system. Well, in LA, that's pretty simple actually. In a city of 4 million people with a voter pool of 2.8 million, nobody participates. Eric Garcetti, whether you love him or hate him, is irrelevant. Eric Garcetti was elected with just 220,000 votes in a city of 4 million people. City council is even worse. City council members represent 300,000 people. There's 3 times as many city council members as any district in America. And yet they are elected with 12,000 votes, 15,000 votes. Not 5. That's not their victory margin. That's the total number of votes. The people of this city don't participate. But there is opportunity. Remember I said there is reason for optimism. The number one reason, on sociological studies, the number one reason people don't vote is because they don't believe their vote matters. Because we're LA, we want to one-up that and take it one step further. We believe that not only do our votes not matter, but no one else does either. But that is an opportunity for change. An opportunity for optimism. Because 75% of Angelenos don't believe change is possible, but we can shift that. Because in all of this, the machine that governs this city made a mistake. A mistake that I think is a good thing for this city. In 2022, the date of the elections have shifted, right? So they handed themselves another year and a half in office, can't say anything about that, but instead of having our elections in March of off-cycle years in 2013, 2017, our elections now align with congressional elections and with California's gubernatorial election. Why is this important? Well, the last 80 years, only about 400,000 people voted. In fact, the same number of people voted in 2017 as in 1949. If you went a little bit of historical trivia, LA was a third of the size in 1949, so it really came out then. In this vein, instead of 400,000 people voting in this city, in 2022, without a single get out the vote effort, 1.2 million people will show up and vote for citywide office. 800,000 people who have never voted for citywide office in their life will vote for the first time. New voters will outnumber previous voters by a 2-to-1 margin. Never in American history have we enfranchised so many people at one time. Never have we pushed so many people into the electorate. What those people believe and what they think will control the future of our city. How many of you voted in 2013 or 2017 in a previous city election? Great. But if we don't bring those 800,000 new people along with you the next time you show up, we are in real trouble. Because there is opportunity and risk. The risk, if you look around in our society, is that this city is full of generalized anger and frustration because people are overwhelmed and angry about what's going on, what they see outside their doors, the ability to walk on the street, right? The resources, the basic resources that the city provides, there is real risk. I don't have to point to national events to show you that when candidates show up and meet generalized anger and frustration, you can build demagogues. And that's not good for LA, and it's a very real possibility. But our goal is to meet people in their anger and frustration and guide them out of it, to believe that change is not possible. How do we do that? 3 steps. It doesn't have to be this way. The city is ours, not theirs. And the change we want to see is possible. So what are those 3 steps? It is a consumer outreach campaign. Email, direct mail, social, digital, outdoor, door knocking, grassroots, everything that we can do to build a coalition of 200,000 everyday Angelenos who believe that not only is change possible, it is the only way forward. It doesn't have to be this way. We start here. How many of you have ever felt overwhelmed when you look at the crises? Just look outside your door like, I don't even know anymore. How many of you feel overwhelmed in this city? It's okay, everybody should, right? Like, when you're driving here, you should, right? That's okay. But people feel less overwhelmed when we give them facts and statistics, right? So when we give them facts and statistics, like LA spends $50,000 a year per homeless person without feeding, housing, or clothing them, when the average Angeleno only makes 29. That can make you angry, but less overwhelmed. Like the fact that we spend over $500,000 a unit on what they call permanent supportive housing, forever homes. Over $1 million a unit when you take into account the price of land, when the cost is much lower than that, right? The fact that no matter what crisis we look at, in homelessness, affordability, and crime, facts are important. And Rise Together is focused on seeding those facts out to as many people as possible. Like pallet shelters, those tiny homes that we've all seen about in the news. Pallet, the company that makes them, will tell you that they cost $8,000 a piece. The city will tell you that, if you can get them, that they paid $120,000 to $150,000 a piece. Not to Pallet, right? Pallet got their $8,000. But the city controller whose job it is to know where all of the rest of the money went, literally said, I don't know where the rest of the money went. I can't find it. Facts anchor us. They ground us. But we can immediately pivot to, it doesn't have to be this way. We need to recognize it doesn't have to be this way. We can take any topic, affordability and home and housing. Now, I'll get to the solution here. Let me be very clear that this is not a zero-sum equation. We can build all the housing we need in Los Angeles without disturbing a single community, without disturbing a single neighborhood or a single culture. And I'll get to that positive, but in the meantime, we can address the basic fact that we don't have enough housing in Los Angeles for the people who already live here, right? Only 13% of our housing capacity has been built in the last 30 years, which means we're not building for 1991. Much less 2021, right? When we look at our housing capacity and skyrocketing rents, it's because we don't have a viable functioning market. Now I'm going to take a brief aside here because I'm a super nerd. I'm probably the only person who's going to talk to you just briefly about economics and Keynesian economics and Greenspan economics, but here's what you need to know. A market on its basic level requires supply and demand. We do not have supply. And I'm not talking about the Southern California government issued numbers about what we need and all those other things. I'm saying when we look at actual economic unbiased models from any economic model, particularly those that govern this country, Keynesian Greenspan economics, named for the late Alan Greenspan, former chairman of the Federal Reserve, we see that we need 400,000 units in LA to have a viable functioning market. What that means is a market where you have affordable housing, you have housing at every level. But because we don't have that inventory and capacity, we're able to push things further and further and further and further up, making it unaffordable for everybody in the city. 70% of people in LA have to stretch to meet their mortgage or their rent. It is unconscionable, and it's the highest level in the developed world. That's insane. It doesn't have to be this way. Crime, you don't need me to tell you that shootings are up 141% year over year. You don't need me to tell you that the DA and the police are more interested in fighting each other than they are in fighting crime. And say what you will about the fight between Bonn and Villanueva, but without taking a side, it's not good when public servants are fighting each other rather than the problem underlying everything. But it doesn't have to be this way. We can get into any issue. 40,000 pages of material, I won't bore you with them, but if you want to talk about pipes, I really love the pipes of it all, right? Like, this city is on a ticking time bomb. 90% of our pipes are over 80 years old, so an earthquake is, really, it's not the earthquake, that's the problem with what comes after. We can talk about streets, sidewalks, crosswalks, the fact you have to drive an hour to walk your dog on a beach, right? Like, the city is just not getting it right, but it doesn't have to be this way. Once we convince people, once we saturate those facts and make them less overwhelmed, it doesn't have to be this way. We can take them on the next step, because we can only take people on one step at a time. Because all you all just being here are 12 steps ahead of everybody else. Just by voting, you are in the extreme minority in this city. You're in the top 5% of most engaged people in this city just by having voted in a city election. We have got to get everyone else along with us, and we've got to do that one step at a time. We've got to craft that narrative. It's what I do every single day. The city is ours, not theirs. What does that mean? Well, 14 out of 15 city leaders have been in office or on a public paycheck for over 20 years. Some longer than I've been alive. If you are unhappy with the direction that this city has gone, you do not have to look around for where to point the finger as to who was in office, because they have all been in office for 20 years. They have all been there and are still there and still running. That's insane, right? Like, when we think about it, I have my running joke, which is only actually mostly accurate, is that the only exit from city council is to another elected office, death or prison. And it's a lot more of the uphill ladder later, and there's more coming, by the way. That sprawling newsletter investigation is not over. It doesn't have to be this way. The city is ours, not theirs. What does that mean? It means that the city council is the same size it was in 1925 when the city was governed by trains and trolleys and horse and buggy. It's the same size as Waukesha, Wisconsin. Beautiful, on the Fox River, 70,000 people. Not Los Angeles, right? Like, not Los Angeles. And it means that our leaders don't get to control what happens in this city. The people do. They don't get to say things like one city councilman, which I'll go unnamed, tweeted, there's a systemic dysfunction and a lack of accountability in city government. Which would have been nice, except he was elected to city council when I was 9, so he is the systemic dysfunction and the lack of accountability. That's a problem. But let's focus again on the solution. Because this city is ours. 1.2 million people are showing up to the polls, no matter what we do. Because when we model turnout from 2018 and 2014 and 2010, that's actually on the low side. That's a 37 to 42% turnout when the city's been averaging 50% turnout. You're talking that number could be up to 1.6 million people. It could be outnumbered 3 to 1 with new voters. What they think and what they believe matters, and they need to believe that this city is ours, collectively ours, so that we can invest in it. And why? Because when you go on that journey from it doesn't have to be this way to this city is ours, what's really, really important is if you're going to convince people that change is possible, we have to show them that the change already exists. Everything you want to see is possible. And I'll just hit on a couple of those, right? So let's take homelessness. It feels very overwhelming. Like, where will we put them all? How will we do it? 18 cities in America have moved to functional zero homelessness, meaning no long-term homelessness. Major cities, north, south, east, west, all over this country, not based on demographic, economic level, or size, 18 cities. 18 cities have moved to functional zero homelessness using solutions created in LA and New York, but never implemented in LA. That's the crazy part. We literally gave solutions to other people. When we do that, those solutions are proven, right? We know that we can house 50% of the homeless in 9 months for under $35,000 a person and 90% in 18 months. In 18 months or under, you can have almost every single person off the street in Los Angeles with housing and services and the help that they need for under $35,000 a person. That is a 90% cost reduction. We've done the modeling on that with everyone, and where are we going to put them? Get this. So we actually just got this fresh data in, and this is my favorite part, because everybody's like, where are we going to put them? Because they're proposing taking part of the beach parking lots and all these things. But well, where else would we put them? Do you know how many homeless people we could actually house in LA County and LA City? How many homeless people do you think we can house in LA County? Take a shot in the dark. You're not going to get anywhere close.
The government is now, it's impossible. I mean, we're trying to...
Give me a number.
7.
I'm gonna do better. Remember, how many people do you think LA County can house?
All of them.
More than all of them.
100,000.
100,000. All of them, right? So that's estimates, because the truth is the city doesn't actually know how many homeless there are, who they are, or where they are, which is a big problem. You can't solve a problem you don't know. When we model this, using only usable land, it doesn't have to be regraded. I could drop something instantly to house someone. And in groups of no more than 20, because we don't want to mass people all in one area, and not using any public recreational space. LA County can house 21 million homeless people, and LA City can house 3 million on its own. It's not about, here's the thing, it's not about what or how to solve the homeless problem. It's a who problem, right? It's a who problem. Because private groups have housed homeless people. Haven, which I use as an example, has housed over 160 people with an 83% success rate without one taxpayer dollar. Right? Pallet homes are available for $8,000 a pop, not $150,000 a pop. It's possible. Affordability, let's talk about building housing. We're actually rolling this out. It's a beautiful color-coded map. Because people have created this false choice where it's like, on one side they're like, build nothing, and on the other side they're like, I want to take away every single family home. Both are wrong. You can build everything that you need to build in this city without disturbing the character of a single neighborhood and without destroying single-family housing. And you can do it in 10 years. And we actually are rolling out a map in the coming weeks that shows, because I've sat with our non-partisan data analysts, and because good Lord loves, math nerds love data even more than me as a nerd, right? And we've color-coded every single lot in the city. Single-family homes, apartment buildings, commercial districts, warehouse districts. We can build the 400,000 units that we need to build. The problem isn't what we build or how we build it, it's the city, right? Because, for example, Housing Diversity Corporation, again out of the Pacific Northwest, can build 20,000 units in 3 years with a top rent of $1,678 a pop, except that they would be required to build a skyscraper of 20 stories of just trees. Now, I'm all for a tree canopy, but this has to make logic and sense, and it doesn't, because our zoning code, like our city council numbers, are outdated. Not only was a city council the same size it was in 1925, but our zoning code was written in 1946. And we've been recode LA for 10 years. And if you're in private enterprise, your boss gives you a project for 10 years and you just sit on it and do nothing, what happens? Leave that answer to you. But everything is possible, right? Crime and having a safe and just city. Those solutions are actually put forward in the Department of Justice's Community Policing Report, a nonpartisan commission that laid out what the relationship of the police and the community should be, where we actually have law enforcement doing law enforcement, and we have first responders helping people who need it in subject matter areas. This is not, we created again this false zero-sum equation where we're like, oh, well, you're either pro-police or pro-social justice. You can be pro-law and order and pro-social justice at the same time. It is possible to have a safe and just city. The Obama administration actually published a report on exactly step-by-step how to do it. But we don't do that, right? And you can do this in every area. The change we want to see is possible. Okay, so now we've gone on this journey. It doesn't have to be this way. The city is ours, not theirs. And the change we want to see is possible. So how do we get that out to people? This is what I do in my day job, right? This is what I've done for major multinational corporations, is craft the public narrative. People have to believe that change is possible. It doesn't matter who's playing at the concert if no one's in the auditorium. And Rise Together is focused on everyone getting to the auditorium in an informed, engaged manner, because people who are emotionally invested in what happens do the right thing. It's sociologically proven. How many of you served on jury duty? Ain't nobody want to serve on jury duty, right? But you all do. And studies show that the vast majority of people who come out of jury duty respect it, and even, oddly, liked it. They respect the system, they took it seriously. There are studies, we put 500 voters together in Texas after the 2016 election. We just fed them facts all day long for 6 weeks. And they all ended up voting in different directions, but they did so in an intentional way. And that's the key here, in an intentional way. Because the best model we have is the Nithya Raman David Ryu Council race, so which is my district, Council District 4. So to put this in perspective, because theirs was the only competitive race in 2020, but they were still subject to the influx of voters from the federal election, because they were also up in November 2020. David Ryu got twice as many votes as any city council member in LA history and still lost the race. This isn't about pro-David or pro-Nithya. This is about the fact that I want you to show up knowing why you made a choice. Because those 800,000 people out there, and all of you have got to make an informed, emotionally invested choice to understand what somebody stands for and what those policies are, to believe that change is possible. But if you don't believe change is possible, then you don't really care, right? Like, we've got to get people to emotionally invest, and we do that through an unprecedented consumer outreach campaign, which we've done 6 times over the last 3 years to shift the public narrative for my clients in my day job. It's the same approach. So it's specific individual targeting. We know, thanks to publicly available voter data and an ad tech that I own and invented in 2014, we know at Rise Together with a 90% probability who's showing up in 2022. And we know how to reach and target them and saturate every area of their life. Now, we can get into the creepy factor of ad tech. That's an entirely separate conversation. But for right now, I'm going to use the creepy to try to save Los Angeles. So buy me some time there, and we'll deal with that later. But it allows us to get into and manipulate the existing algorithms so that we can actually saturate our messaging wherever you get it. See, how many of you get a direct mail piece and just get it and throw it away without even looking at it? Right? But there are people who don't. We know who, based on their consumer behavior history, based on all the things that we've done with them. We've run $2 billion in media over the last 7 years, which has given us data on 92% of the American population and how they behave. We reach people at every step, from a click to an open rate, so social engagement, right? When you click on a social post and you like, you share, all those things. All those things are trackable and measured. The gold standard is 5 to 8%. Rise Together is at 58%. Right? Email open rates, 12 to 14% is the average. Rise Together is at 56%. Even display, those little ads on the top of a website that you see, the display rates, the click-through rate, people who see an ad and then click on it, is typically 0.1% to 0.4%. Rise Together is at 5 to 7%, almost 50 times that average. There is a thirst for change in this city, but we have to saturate people 111 times a month in order to reach them. So when we calculate what that takes, the number of people we have to reach, how many times we have to reach them, how much media, Rise Together in its first phase is focused on raising and spending $1.986 million in media to break the machine that governs this city, to restore power to people. $1.986 million in media to save Los Angeles. Seems like a bargain basement price, to be honest. So if anybody has $1.986 million, let me know. We've already raised $500,000. But we're also focused on using that media to build the largest grassroots coalition of everyday Angelinos in the city. 200,000 people by November of this year. And why? Because the city can ignore 100 of you. The city can ignore 1,000 of you, and they have. The city can ignore a petition with 31,000 signatures, and they have. But when you build 200,000 engaged individuals from every council district, from all walks of life, it is impossible to ignore. They shift the tide of the election. The election becomes not about what politicians want to say to them, but about what they have to say to politicians. Their issues, our issues, become first and foremost what the race is focused on. But we only do that when we take these people on a journey. And that's where the media dollars come in, to reach and saturate them, to realize that it doesn't have to be this way. The city is ours, not theirs, and the change we want to see is possible. Using the most sophisticated data, an advertising and outreach campaign in the country, something that's never been possible in Los Angeles before. Now, all of this to convince people that change is not only possible, but it is the only way forward. So there's a favorite philosopher of mine, Pascal, philosopher scientist, and if you're familiar with the term called Pascal's bet, right? In Pascal's bet, he was asked once, do you believe in God? It's irrelevant as to whether you believe in God, this is about Pascal, right? But he was asked, do you believe in God? And he said, you're asking the wrong question. The question is not, do I believe in God? If I believe in God, and I live a good and righteous life, and there is no God, what have I lost? If I don't believe in God, and I live a different life, and there is a God, I'm screwed. So, I want to transfer that a little bit to Rise Together. Maybe you believe in change, maybe you don't. Maybe you believe that this works, that this nerd standing in front of you, who really, really wants a city that he and you and my father and my family can believe in. The city of the future that we can all believe and we all know is possible. If you do believe, and it doesn't happen, what have you lost? But if you don't believe, if you don't try, if you don't join a coalition that is trying to save this city based on facts and bringing people to the table, we have lost a whole lot more. So I hope that you will place the Rise Together bet. I hope that you will scan the QR codes on your palm cards to donate. And we'll get to that in a second. Everything helps. Everything goes towards our media campaign and putting things in market and reaching and building a larger coalition. Everything $500, $1,000. It's incredibly important to fuel that, but also signing people up, volunteering, donating. We've got Kate, where are you, in the back of the room. If you're interested in volunteering, you can highlight your name when you signed in. But I also want to make sure that we take an opportunity, unlike many city leaders, to answer the questions you might have. And so I want to thank you for showing up tonight, for taking time out of your Monday night. And I want to thank you in advance for placing the Rise Together bet with me. Because together, when the spotlight of the world is on us in 2028, this can be a city that we can all be proud of. The change we want to see is possible. Rise Together is focused on it, and we hope you will be too. Thank you. Mike will pass around if you've got questions. First one back here. Give me a second to give you the mic.
I also feel that Mr. Bonner should be recalled. And then I think, this is a really difficult job that he has. Who's going to take this job? No one wants this job. This is an insane job. You have people wanting you to do this and then wanting you to do that. It's like, I would not take that job. Forget it. I would go crazy. How are we going to get people to actually do this? People, smart people like you.
Thank you. Thank you. Great question. It's my favorite question. It's always the first question, and I love that, right? Who are the candidates? So we have a classic chicken and the egg here, right? So the candidates will tell you this. I don't even know that the city's paying attention. It doesn't matter if Mitchell Schwartz was the right person to challenge Garcetti in 2017. No one was paying attention, right? The reality is we have got to get the water warm. We have got to show the demand for change is possible. Rise Together is placing that bet. Now, we're not just leaving it up to chance. We have met with several people who are already running and several people who are considering running. There are smart, talented people in every race who will consider stepping forward. I did this, right? Like this is, everyone asks me all the time, they're like, did you hit your head too many times as a child? Which is probably true, right? But I'm obsessed with saving the city, right? Like I cannot see a world in which we let this go on. I'm not the only one. I'm not the smartest one. I'm not the best one. But there are people in every single race who are ready and available. You've got to have faith. And I'm going to tell you that there's a whole lot of things coming down the pipeline. There's redistricting, although I don't think it's going to be as crazy as many of the maps that you all have seen that look a little insane to me. Although the city has done some insane things, but I think it'll be more logical on that basis. The candidates are there. There are candidates in every race, and you'll start to see that. In some of the races, they're already parroting the Rise Together messaging, which is to their credit, because that's the whole point, right? Because our messaging is the public's priorities. We're just here to show the public. The candidates are there. And in November, after we build a movement, because there's an ethical line there, we want to build the movement. And then we will conduct a very public and transparent endorsement hearing process. So y'all have seen congressional hearings of the Senate and everything else, and you all see that like hundreds of organizations make endorsements, and you're like, I don't just see a stamp on a postcard, who is this and how did they do it? In November, we will be utilizing the members of our coalition to have a very public endorsement hearing process where everyone has a voice, everyone has the ability to have their questions answered, and then Rise Together will make endorsements based on adherence to the common ground, common sense philosophies that we promote and the interests of its members. Those endorsements are important, just like all of the other endorsements in the city, but they're most important in my mind because they will be public and transparent and all of the hard questions, but trust me, the candidates are there, but we have got to get the water warm for these candidates or ain't nobody in their right mind gonna wanna run. Next question. Up here. Give me 1 second, we need the mic. Thanks, Trey.
It seems to me like one of the issues is that California is really a one-party state, that it is purely a democratic state, and as such, the polarization has become just enormous, and it allows politicians to do things that are not really in the public interest, but are ideologically within the interest of it. And I don't know how we solve that, but I think that's really, like, to me, that's one of the major problems that we have with any change in California and Los Angeles.
Great question, thank you on that front. We do live in a hyper-partisan environment. The good news is, when we look down at the municipal level, which is where we're starting, we're squarely focused on LA City, it's less partisan by party in municipal levels. It's why there's a Republican mayor in Boston, of all places, a Republican governor in Maryland. Like, the more local you get, the more people are willing to look past party. In LA, it's a non-partisan election. Like, there's no party affiliation, right? Like, so it's not like a Democrat versus a Republican. But most importantly, what you're talking about is just everybody seems to be at each other's throats all the time. And it seems like people are just catering to one niche or the other. Well, that's the advantage of the media machine that we have. We have the ability to reverse engineer away from that, because that is driven by clicks, right? Like, that is driven by for-profit social companies and for-profit media companies, driven by clicks, right? So that I need a headline that's a clickbait so that I'm going to generate more revenue, all of those pieces. Our media machine can step in and manipulate that, right? Because they're looking at clicks, but without most paid media promotion. And there's nothing, as much as a social media company loves a viral post, the one thing they love more is a penny, right? They're profit-driven enterprises, and our data allows us to step in and shift that narrative on a local level, right? And it allows us to allow for a fact-based conversation so that we segment that messaging, right? So that it's not just one viral headline to the next. It's not just whether it's 12 people or 100 people showing up at a march, or 1,000 people or 10,000 people, and the LA Times covers it one way or the other, no matter how you feel about them, the vast majority of people are not getting their news from the LA Times, right? And so our ability is to put all of those facts in front of people. And over time, studies show that that reduces that partisanship. People, this isn't about party. This isn't about Democrat or Republican. Let me be very clear. If you listen to the policies that I talked about, you'd be like, wait, which one? Which? Neither, right? Because it is about real progress for the city. If we are talking about party, we've already lost our focus. Because it needs to be about the people of this city instead of the party. And the people of this city have shown a willingness to do that, right? And we've seen that in fleeing registrations from both of the major parties towards an independent basis. But the reality is, when people consume facts, they look less at party on a local level, and that's to our advantage. And so goes LA, so goes California. So goes California, so goes the rest of the country. I didn't just start this to save LA, right? Like, we can save LA, but this is a scalable solution to every municipality in the country. When we focus on local politics being local, we can restore a sense of sanity to our conversation in this country, because local politicians become state politicians, and state politicians become federal politicians. And we can actually rebuild this from the ground up. But it's got to start in one place. It's got to start with a model that we know works in shifting the narrative, in using the media machines that we have. Thank you.
I don't know if we talked about this before I got here. I was just moving forward. We find the candidate, 2028 happens. we home all of the homelessness is a systemic problem that I think is a function of multiplicity of things or range of things. So now we house people. That's really symptomatic homelessness. How do we reintegrate them into society? And it's going to be a revolving door where you get some people back on track and other people are in the midst of losing everything that they've got. And so how do you address the multiplicity of problems that are leading to the homelessness in the first place?
I appreciate that. Thank you. Let me be very clear. Homelessness can feel complicated, but at its heart, and there can be lots of reasons and causes for it, but at its heart, there are some basic things at play. First, let me repeat, homelessness is solvable, and we know that because 18 cities in America have solved it and moved to functional zero homelessness, no long-term homelessness. New people can come in, but they don't stay. They don't stay permanently homeless. Those programs exist. Like I said, they were designed based on studies and work in LA and New York, just never implemented in LA. Now, we can't tell, again, I'd be a metaphor like a dead horse, right? In the saying, which is like you can't tell a morbidly obese patient with 3 bullet wounds to get on the treadmill, right? We've got to get the bullets out first. We've got to get the people on the streets, off the streets, and we have to prevent new people from becoming homeless. You don't go from 10,000 to 50,000 or 60,000 homeless unless new people became homeless. And it's not the rumor mill that they all moved here from somewhere else, right? And it doesn't matter where they moved here from. They're here. You got to deal with the problem you have, not the problem you want. But you got to prevent new people from becoming homeless in the first place. The answer is, okay, so by show of hands, if you were going to become homeless tomorrow, and you needed to call someone in the city, not a friend, not a family member, someone in the city, how many of you would know what number or who to call? That is the problem. We created a housing rental assistance program in the eviction moratorium during the pandemic. Money, hundreds of millions of dollars, went unused because the program was so complex that people could not actually figure out how to use it. You had to go to your landlord, get them to consent. If they didn't consent, you had to file an application. The application itself was unreadable. I mean, good heavens. It has got to be simple to stay housed. A 24/7 comprehensive hotline staffed by nonprofits who agreed to forensic accounting, because no nonprofit in the city currently has forensic accounting. Right? And I don't need new city employees, but forensic accounting nonprofits that are immediately empowered to show up within 24 hours with solutions. So what happens if you're a single working mother with 2 jobs and you have to face a choice between your rent and a car repair payment because your car broke, right? Because before the pandemic, 40% of Americans did not have more than 2 weeks of extra cash to live on. So now you're going to lose your house, so you call this hotline. Caseworker shows up and says, this makes sense. All right, I gotta dig deeper as to what happened here, but it's clear that you had a car repair bill, that you paid it, you're short on rent, this is what you make. I'm gonna pay your landlord rent this month, and I'm gonna be your caseworker for the next 6 months to make sure this doesn't happen again. Right? And that nonprofit is focused on forensic accounting, so we know where all of the money went. And even in the isolated instances of fraud, we will have prevented new homelessness with a 95% cost reduction, because it is 10 times cheaper to keep people off the streets than it is to get them off the streets once they're there. And then we can build for the long term, right? We need interim government authority to make sure that people have places to live, so that everyone who has a house today has a house tomorrow, right? A pledge that our city won't make. We can talk all we want about housing is human right and that sort of thing, but those are policies without teeth. Here's a policy with teeth, right? A housing hotline to make sure that anyone who's about to lose their home, who has a house today, will have a house tomorrow, and have the help that they need for the next 6 months to stay housed, while we get people off the street. And yes, there are systemic long-term problems, but they aren't endemic to the city, and they are solvable. We don't have a housing market, right? And we're pushing businesses that we need out of the city. There's no reason that the $2 trillion, now soon to be $3 trillion space companies should not be based in Southern California, which is a natural geographical home for them that brings good jobs to this city. It doesn't matter how you feel about the founders of those companies, you're talking about hundreds of thousands of people who could be employed, and then who will be employed around those industries. But we are chasing them out of this city. We need to be very clear. In California, 10% of the population is responsible for 80% of the state's revenues. If you lose even 1% of that 10%, you enter a death spiral that will make the economic flight of the 80s look like child's play. We cannot be in that business. We've got to be, and we can be, a city innovation fund where we invest in startups, right? We take stakes in startups. How many people were out here on Silicon Beach, right? Or across the city, startups. If we had invested in them, using the money we had, and with the typical return of a venture capitalist, we would be able to cut taxes and increase social programs at the same time while ensuring that those companies are based here with a 20-year agreement. The policies exist. Those are called sovereign wealth funds and they exist in other countries. We just don't do them here. The question is not how or what, is always going to be who. Thank you.
What is your immediate thought on the swing vote? The swing vote, the black vote. Many of the politicians know that the black vote usually is the swing vote. Many of the local politicians come to the church, the black church. My church, New Bethel, 5th and Brooks, if they want to win. And usually when they come to the black church, it's the swing vote that usually the turnout in the black community. What is your immediate thought on the swing vote? And then what is your vision and goal for the young people? I see Andreas around here working, and how are we going to get the young people involved in the 200,000 potentials that will gain the focus of any politician? That's my concern.
Thank you, Pastor. So, the black vote and the swing vote in Los Angeles, I'm gonna take that, I'm gonna be specific about that and take it one step further. With the mass of people that we have coming in this city, every constituency is important, but we are used to seeing politicians pledge something and then have no accountability for delivering on it. The point of a coalition of 200,000 everyday Angelenos is accountability. Because if you don't do what you say, you're going to meet a steel wall on the other side, right? The answer is we have got to put this city in a position where people stop taking any ethnic group or any vote for granted, right? They've got to stop manipulating. Look, we'll take another population, another vulnerable population in the city. Los Angeles houses more veterans than any other city in America. In fact, in Los Angeles City, there are 210,000 veterans. In Los Angeles County, there are almost 500,000. And yet you go up on Veterans Road in Brentwood and ask yourself what we're doing for people who were so inspired by this country that they went abroad and got blown up or saw friends die and came home, and now what? We deport veterans. Did you know that? I didn't know that until I started talking to my veterans working group, and they very rightfully correct me on this. There's a house south of the border for all the veterans that we've deported. In the black community, when people show up and they say, well, let me hear your concerns. Let me be very clear. Your concerns are this city's concerns. An affordable city is affordable for everyone, including the black community. An affordable city, a city where we have solutions to homelessness, is a solution to homelessness for everyone, including the black community. And then when we solve the immediate crises, we can see how they disproportionately affect communities of color in this city. Because the vast majority of the homeless in this city come from communities of color. But the reality is, when we rise together, everyone rises together. Because this isn't about pitting the interests of any individual group against another. We share common ground. We both want to see a better LA. We both want to see accountability for that better LA. And yes, when we finally get out of the woods, which is not too far in front of us, when we made real progress on all of these crises, homelessness, affordability, crime, social justice, all of these things, when we can turn to the individual neighborhood issues where all local politics is local again, because I'm going to tip the angle here, post-2022 election, we need a complete reformation of how this city is governed, including a city charter that mandates that no city councilman can represent more than 100,000 people, which would immediately restore local leadership to local power. So that you don't have a community like Watts sandwiched into another district because a councilman wanted to take revenge on another councilman. We all know what happened in 2010. We're pulling districts that share no community of interest away from each other. So we have to stop pitting groups against each other, and we've got to make sure every group sees themselves when we rise together, them also rising. It's not just the black community, but we have to focus on every community. You need dedicated programming. The Black community, the veterans community, the undocumented community. There are concrete solutions for every single one of them. The change is not what, it is who. And who is the answer to your second question. Trey's one of my favorite people. He's been, since the early days of Rise Together, he's been helping with microphone duty. He was there when I visited Haven for the first time. Young people are the future of this city, but we've created a youth development department. Anybody know what it does? Anybody know the budget of the department? Anybody know anything other than the press release around the department? These are the answers to the questions. What are the real programs that we face? So we're designing 2 programs, one for the youth of the city and one for the veterans of the city, and you're catching me on this because I have not rolled these out publicly. So you're gonna get the breaking news here. We call them Youth Company and Victory Company. We're gonna make a pledge of public service and employment for every single youth in this city and to every single veteran in this city. So I don't know if you know this, and I'm gonna steal the focus away from youth for veterans because they're related and it's easier to understand. We train people to become military weapons. That's the nature of the military. They sacrifice their lives and their freedom because they are in service of our country. And when they come home, after spending years training the military to be weapons, we don't actually train them to de-weaponize. There is no programming for them when they come home for re-entry. There's nothing to take away years of training, of day in, day in, and day out. We're pledging to create Victory Company, which is a 6-month comprehensive re-entry program with practical skills in economics, social health, mental health, all of the things that you need to live in everyday life. And then the next 18 months, you spend half your time in community service and the other half in whatever skills training or education you need, all free of charge, while getting a full-time paycheck. 2 years of guaranteed employment. This isn't a handout, right? We are getting what we need, which is a comprehensive force out in the city who are engaging the community. Because if you can do community engagement in Fallujah, you can certainly do it in Los Angeles. And a force that's building skills, a force that serves mentors in the city, and then we're going to replicate for that for the youth in this city, right? Which is that every youth who graduates high school in the city, and there are far too many that don't, so we've got to fix that problem. I mean, LAUSD lost 8,000 students in the pandemic with misplaced stuff. Just leave that there for a second. We misplaced 8,000 students. We still don't know where they are, whether they moved away, if they're here, what's going on. But every youth that graduates in Los Angeles needs to go through the same program, 6 months of intensive training around economics and all the things they need to live life. Because when I graduated high school, I had no idea like what rent was when I bought a house. I had no idea what a mortgage was or how it works, right? Like 6 months of intensive training program and then 18 months split half-time in public service and in skills-based training and education so that we become a city that serves its people. And this isn't a handout. This is called building a middle class. This is called building up the people of this city and serving them. So the youth of this city need to know that LA has a home for them and all of these other programs, a safe and just city, our city innovation fund. When a youth says, I want to go into engineering or computer science or space or wherever it is, they need to find that industry has a home here. We used to be the greatest creative hub on the planet. And yet now everywhere else in America has more production than we do. We need to be a home for every industry and for every dream. Whether it's a Black dream, or a youth dream, or a veteran's dream, this needs to become the city of dreams again. And it can be. All with the resources we have, because let me be very clear, there's plenty of money in the budget, right? We can start by taking away the $20 million slush fund that's given to each city councilman. Did you know that? Every city councilman has $20 million in unaccountable funds in the $11.2 billion budget that was passed where they get to just hand out wherever they want, and they name it after themselves. Just, John Smith Grant, as if the money came from them. We start by taking those types of funds and putting them towards the communities that need them most. Thank you. Thank you for that thoughtful question.
Middle class, Gen Z, Gen Y, community member do like today to help contribute to, let's say like homelessness in Venice or affordability in Venice, like today? And how can we evangelize that to our friends?
Absolutely, thank you. Well, I'm going to split that into 2 parts. So there are a number of programs out in the city. We're not here to reinvent the wheel. We are not conducting outreach on the boardwalk. We are not here to replicate the many outreach programs that exist. Rise Together has one very methodical focus. I had an English client once, and I was pushing the team to finish everything, and I left, and they were upset, and I was pushing them too hard, and I left the room, and they said, oh, Craig, he's just pushing us so hard to get so far, and my client said, yes, that's why I hired him, because say what you will, we will get to our deadline, ahead of schedule, under budget, even if he has to drag all of you across the finish line dead. I have moderated since then, but I have a methodical focus on what we at Rise Together, this coalition, what we, our leadership need to do, which is focusing on bringing change now in building this movement and bringing change in 2022. So we are not conducting outreach programs on the boardwalk, we're not conducting those pieces. However, if you email us at contact@risetogether.la, we can refer someone to that. We're not messaging out what to do immediately because it's a completely separate component, right? I gotta raise the first $2 million before I start thinking about how to spend the next $2 million to save the city. But there are real everyday things you can do. And if you want to contribute to Rise Together, you can do it in any number of ways. We have an entire volunteer corps that you can join in door knocking, in phone calls, in outreach, in building that coalition, in spreading the movement. Hell, even in sharing social posts, because everything helps, right? Things that cost no money, that cost only time. And then for those who have the resources, every donation from $25 to $1,000 to $2,500 matters and makes a difference. Because the faster we get to that goal, the faster we save the city. And if you want resources outside Rise Together, we'll help try to connect you with those if you contact us. And we have time for one more question, if there is one. Yeah, Mr. Rosen.
So, Craig, a question was on my mind the first time I met you, almost 2 months ago. And when you talk about your hunger, it makes me think of a very hungry city that we live in. The LHUSD may have misplaced 8,000 students, but they fed our city, our children during the pandemic. They couldn't educate them, so they fed them. So the fact is that hunger is not something we've talked about, and yet it seems that when you're really hungry, or you're in poverty, my daughter taught at Jefferson High School for a while, 75% of that high school in poverty. How do you get them to focus on rising when they're dealing with poverty, which is something you know so much about?
Yeah, how do you get people to focus on rising together when they're focused on just their day-to-day needs, on their hunger, every aspect of it? So we've got to provide real solutions, right? And hunger is certainly one of them. But the background to all of this is that when people show up in 2022, we need them swimming in the ocean of disbelief. There are a lot of people who do not have the time and the energy to pay attention right now, do not have the time that you took out. Thank you for being with us tonight. They will pay attention 6 hours before an election, 6 days before an election, 6 months before an election. But when they start paying attention, and they will, 37 to 42% turnout, right? Probably closer to 50% turnout, but we like to be conservative on this. We want them swimming in an ocean of belief in change. We want them to be surrounded by the messaging that they realize that it doesn't have to be this way. The city is ours, not theirs, and that change is possible. We're not a food bank. There are lots of incredible food banks and nonprofits and organizations, the Hollywood Food Coalition, even LAST efforts that are working to solve those problems in the short term. We are focused methodically on the long term. And on doing that is step one, getting people of the city to believe in change and saturating their world with it. So when they are paying attention and showing up to the polls, that they're voting on that change. Whenever they're ready, it's our job to meet them there. That's what we do every single day. So yes, we've got to solve hunger, we've got to solve poverty, but we can't do that unless we bring a real change in leadership to the city and a belief that that change is possible. And so that's our focus at Rise Together.
So districts that are suffering with those, you feel that, and are up for election in the next 8, that Rise Together will be able to permeate in that areas?
Yeah, we know from our pilot work in the first 2 months that no matter where you are in the city, that the messaging that we're doing resonates. It resonates with every single person. We've got an outreach event in South LA and downtown with every demographic group. We're doing these talks around the city. We're doing community events. We're working with a gentleman named Hala from Watts, who's a poet and spoken word activist to craft art. And a theatrical program around that, so we're reaching out to every single person. The hunger and the thirst is there. We see that in the resonance of the messaging. They are paying attention, they are engaged, because things have gotten so bad in this city that for the first time in the history of the city, no matter where you are, no matter what the color of your skin, no matter what your economic level, 90% of Angelenos agree on the crises that are confronting this city, and it's our job to help them believe that solutions there are possible. And I hope that you'll join us on our journey. Thank you for joining us tonight. Scan the QR code on your phone and